today we're going to go through some of the best ideas of all time.
Yeah, well, purely subjective via me and you, so who knows?
The best ideas that we're aware of.
Right now that may change in 12 months. Yeah, let's
exactly.
do it. But that's the beauty of it. It's an infinite game.
Okay, so the first one, is optimism a scam? What's the skeptic?
Is it shut down the railways, shut down airlines, shut down electricity, shut down it all? It's all a scam. We need more nihilism. We need more pessimism. No, I wrote this essay called "Is Optimism a Scam?" And the pure thesis behind it was what you had about 20 years ago was The Secret, the book that came out. And it was this idea that you could just manifest things into reality. And the cynical, skeptical crowd completely decided to destroy that idea. And I always use so there's three great examples of The Secret. So you've got one, which is Winston Churchill, when he was 19 years old, saying, one day this great city will be under attack. I will be the one that saves it. So that's like 50 years before World War II. You have Arnold Schwarzenegger saying, I will become the greatest bodybuilder ever and the greatest movie star, or the biggest movie star at the time. There's one which is from John Rockefeller as well, which is, one day I will be the richest man in the world. He said that to his bank teller who rejected him for a bank, apparently. So that's the kind of bull case for ridiculous affirmations that manifest reality. But the problem with that is, for every Rockefeller, Schwarzenegger, Churchill, there's 10,000 delusional assholes that say these things and they aren't backed up. So the skeptics are right there. And the problem that the optimism crowd has, in my opinion, it's a marketing problem. They've sold it. They've oversold it. And the best put down ever was Dave Chappelle, where he's saying, if The Secret was true, why aren't all the starving kids in Africa manifesting food? And you go, that's the ultimate win, right? So optimism, as a result, has kind of struggled a few else. And the problem with optimism is they've oversold the product, is my thesis. So imagine if you sold creatine as human growth hormone. That's what I see people have done with optimism. So what we need to do is appeal to skeptics' language to kind of win the optimism game, which is, if you go to PubMed and search placebo effect, 100,000 results. Everybody in the scientific community acknowledges the power of the placebo effect. There's one study where it started in World War II. I forgot the name of the doctor, where it was the US versus the Italians, and there was loads of soldiers, struggling. And rather than give them morphine because he'd run out, he started giving them salt water, and they could go through surgery with it. So the placebo effect is something magical. It's something powerful. And therefore, I think you can use that a little bit to argue the skeptic's case for optimism. And ultimately, where I go down, this is what optimism is. It's to improve 1% every single day. So have you heard of the cocktail party effect? Have I told you about that?
No.
So the cocktail party effect is me and you sat here like we've been in a few bars or restaurants at Terry's Barbecue down the road, right? And the background noise is a blur. It's me and you chatting, blur, 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 blur. But if somebody says Voodoo Events, which is Chris's old events company, or mentions the northeast of England, or whatever it is, suddenly that background noise, you go, what is that? You immediately tune into it. So right now, your brain is blurring out infinite inputs, millions of inputs that are happening right now, and you're focusing on what appeals to your reticular activating system. And I think the case for optimism is, you're not going to manifest things into reality, but if you have a more optimistic frame, you're more likely to spot those opportunities. And I say, market optimism as a 1% improvement every single day, and then you'll probably get more people to believe it. So I think that's the problem with optimism. It was oversold.
Yeah, the baby and bathwater got thrown out together.
Exactly.
Right?
They threw. I put that baby and bathwater meme, which is they throw the baby out, which is like useful optimism with a load of delusional, wishy thinking, Instagram quotes, bullshit. And that's the problem.
Especially the first, kind of like eugenics. Optimism's like eugenics, that the first iteration of really, really aggressive optimism came from Rhonda Byrne's The Secret. This is the woman who said that the 2006 Boxing Day tsunami that killed like tens of thousands of people, I think in Thailand, was due to the Thai people giving out bad vibes that like manifested and attracted this natural disaster.
It's like if you advertise creatine as going to fix everything. It's not. It's a small 1% improvement every day. But the actual difference is you may then have an opportunity that opens up that completely compounds. So I think James Clear has that graph where if you improve 0.1% every single day, if that compounds, that's a 36x improvement in a year. That's the argument, I think, for optimism. It's a 1% improvement every single day. And ultimately, society is getting better. And I think it's important to repeat that point.
Well, everybody's deluded, right? In one form or another. Everybody has some type of delusion. As far as I can see, and both of us come from the north of the UK, this is like the fucking ground zero for cynicism, pessimism, skepticism, not necessarily coming from an intellectual place, but almost coming from a genetic place. It feels like there's a predisposition. The weather's grey, the people are grey, the mood is grey. So everybody has a degree of delusion, right? Why not have a delusion that benefits you? Like, if you're going to not be accurate necessarily, if you know that you're going to be inaccurate about the future and you know that you can't know everything, which is true, I don't think that erring on the side of things are going to get worse, especially given that every quantifiable metric available says that things are getting better. Yes. Is it difficult that we're dealing with the existential pain of life direction and all that stuff? Yeah, 100%. I get that. And it's a luxurious position to be in, to have an existential crisis, because all of the bottom layers of Maslow's hierarchy of needs have been sorted. So it's a challenge that very few people have had to deal with. So there's not any wisdom that's been archetypally passed down over generations, because so few people got to the situation where they were safe from shelter and food and water and connection and blah, blah, meaning and all that stuff. So yeah, I understand it's a difficult challenge, but like, everything is getting better, which means that optimism, what looks like optimism is actually realism. And what looks like realism is actually like pessimism.
Yeah, I think anybody who follows me for a while, and the ones who haven't, and I have to describe this, ones who are listening audio, is there's this matrix which is optimism and pessimism, and then low agency and high agency. And I feel that, yeah, if you have optimism with a low sense of agency, that isn't valuable at all. But paired with high agency, I think that's one of the most beautiful things. There's this like one thing that I always come back to as well, which is this Steve Jobs email. I think I might have told you about this one, where he sent to himself 13 months before he died. It came out quite recently. And Steve Jobs wrote this to himself. I grow little of the food I eat, and the little I do grow, I did not breed or perfect the seeds. I do not make any of my own clothing. I speak a language I did not invent or refine. I did not discover the mathematics I use. I am protected by freedoms and laws I did not conceive or legislate, and do not enforce or adjudicate. I am moved by music I did not create myself. When I needed medical attention, I was helpless to help myself survive. I did not invent the transistor, the microprocessor, object-oriented programming, or most of the technology I work with. I love and admire my species, living and dead, and I am totally dependent on them for my life and well-being. The one guy who could have, A, could be very pessimistic in that scenario, but B, also, rightly so, have a fucking ego. It's so like that. I always come back to that. Whenever I feel quite pessimistic, I go, fuck, life's actually very, very good.
How do you reframe it yourself? So everybody has this draw toward cynicism, pessimism. It's cool to do it on the internet. It somehow becomes sexy to be cynical because it's seen as like a signal of high intellect. How do you stop yourself tumbling down that rabbit hole?
It's a good question. I think one of them, I have this thing of like hardware versus software, which is most people think they have a software problem when they actually have a hardware problem. So if I'm finding myself thinking more cynically, thinking more negatively, I'll just try and fix the hardware. So it's like some kind of breathing exercise, sauna, run, exercise, eat well. My friend Dickie says that when he's tired or in that kind of emotional state, his goal of the day is just to make no decisions. So I just often, a good night's sleep or whatever it is, try and fix it that way. That for me fixes about 95% of my software problems. And then the remaining 5%, which may be legitimate issues, are much easier to solve in that. So that's the first thing I'd say, is fix hardware before you try and fix software. And then I think it's a lot about who you're around. It's a lot about studying. Studying history is super important, because you go, fuck, I could have been born in 1612.
Yep.
Or I could have been part of World War II, which was a blink of an eye away. And when you actually look at it from a historical perspective, it's like, well, where's better than now? I don't think there is a better time than now.
Yeah, I came up with this yesterday. I told you about the alpha history fantasy.
Oh, yeah.
So modern men who are angry at the world they feel has rejected them mistakenly believe they would have done better in medieval times. They're somehow adamant that the chance of them being Genghis Khan is greater than the chance of them being cannon fodder peasant number 1,373,582, whose favela was sacked and destroyed.
That would have been me.
Yeah, you think you would have been cannon fodder peasant?
100%.
Okay. Well, I think Huberman's got this quote where he says, you cannot change the mind with the mind, you have to change it with the body. It's not strictly true, because meditation is precisely changing the mind with the mind, but I think broadly it's true that most of the problems that people encounter are hardware problems rather than software problems. I learned this during COVID. For the first time in my entire life, I had a stable sleep and wake pattern. I went to bed and got up at the same time, 7 days a week, for the first time since I was 18, and I was 32. So I'm like, right, okay. There's something to this. There's something to having a set routine. And I'd sent it to you. I remember sending to you Matthew Walker on Rogan, being like, wow, look how important sleep is. Meanwhile, staying up until 4 a.m, cashing up nightclubs like 2 or 3 nights a week. So you need to really sort of see it and feel it. Yes, on Hardware Problem. Also, I had this idea called the Cynicism Safety Blanket.
I don't know that one.
I'm happy with this. So this is explaining why cynicism is incredibly trendy, especially in the modern world. Cynicism is a guarded response which sets yourself up against disappointment. Its role within the system is to protect you against experiencing anything bad. It is a preemptive strike against a perceived threat. If I tell myself that all women are bad, then I'm less likely to seek a relationship with women, and as a consequence, I'm never going to feel the pain of rejection. If I tell myself that everything is shit, or that things will never get better, then I'm excused of ever having to try at anything. It's more comfortable to get fatalistic and call it pragmatism. The cope is framing hope as pathetic and embarrassing and optimism as delusion. It's sour grapes at an existential level. If everything sucks and everyone is horrible and the reality is disappointing and you know that for a fact, then it's the people acting like things that can be better that are dumb, delusional, and the problem. The upside of never trying is never having to feel the pain of failure.
And I also think that ties into the cocktail party effect, what we just spoke about, where if you have that cynical outlook and you have that pessimistic outlook, I mean, you can still win the lottery, of course, but you will, if there's so much sensory inputs that's trying to go into your brain, you will just see it more. You will see more of it. You'll end up down darker YouTube rabbit holes. You'll end up watching those things. You'll end up in those cesspits. So it's this kind of perpetual flywheel that then begins to compound.
Yeah, you're looking
both ways.
Yeah, you're looking for evidence that confirms the worldview that you didn't want to have, but that you somehow have inculcated from being on the internet too much.
Mm-hmm. Scott Adams, the creator of Dilbert, he has this idea in one of his books where it's called the weed filter, and he used to think that if he smoked weed, people became way nicer to him. So he started smoking more and more weed. And then he began to realize, actually, he was just more relaxed because he was so tight and stiff that all of a sudden his interaction with the world also has an effect on how they interact with him. When he was way more relaxed, people were then way more relaxed around him. It wasn't actually the weed. And then he realized it wasn't actually the weed itself. It was purely the filter that he was viewing things through.
Yeah, it's trying to push optimism is
it's tough, yeah.
It's a really hard road.
You know, I mean, I then going back to what we said earlier, so you've done the hardware, software thing. It's more just looking around and just looking at the reality of the situation. Like one of my favorite stories is, I forgot the writer who did it, but he tried to make a chicken sandwich from scratch. Have you heard this story? So he tried to create a chicken sandwich purely from scratch. So the bread,
first principles sandwich.
First principles took him 6 months and cost him £1,500.
Oh, so you had to grow the wheat or whatever that was ground up to make the flour to do the right. Okay,
and you just don't think about those things of how really when you look at human beings, there's nothing actually that special about them, but the ability to create ideas, which we spoke about to begin with, and then the ability to cooperate at scale. It's that thing about if you tried to create a pencil, you couldn't. No one knows how to create a pencil because the the fucking rubbers from here, the leads from here, no one knows it, and that is quite beautiful. And you need optimistic people in order to be able to collaborate, to play those positive sum games. It's so important. And listen, is it going to fix cancer if you've got cancer? Of course not. But one of my favorite examples is Brian Armstrong, who used to write down every single day, I will create $1 billion company. Do I think that created $1 billion company? No, of course not. It was hard work. He's probably ridiculous IQ. He's probably got a great network. He had the right idea. He went through Y Combinator, had all those things. But could that have helped a little bit? Possibly. Same with Churchill, same with Arnold, same with all of them.
I would love to see the case for pessimism. The only reason that I can see that pessimism would potentially be, the case that would be put forward, would be that it protects people emotionally from the pain of failure. That's really the only thing. If you set your sights so low, you can never be disappointed by reality.
I mean, one of the things I'd kind of fork this conversation here is I do think there's some utility to pessimism. And that kind of George Orwellian double think, the ability to hold two ideas at the same time is so important. So if you can actually take a pessimistic frame and go, oh, what's the worst scenario that can happen here? It's that Tim Ferriss fear setting idea. I think that's super valuable as well. And the ability to constantly use optimism and pessimism when you need it. But I'd say on the whole, I think optimism's more useful. Likewise, if you can take a high agency frame when you need it, and also the ability to empathize with what the low agency version of this will be, the ability to operate in multiple mindsets, I think is super important. It's that George Fitzgerald quote, which is you can tell the mark of a first-rate intellect by the ability to hold two opposing thoughts at the same time. And that's very rare these days. People either go to one end of the spectrum or the other. And I'm often quite fucking obsessed with what's that third door?
Yeah.
No
Well,
one's
if I go
discussing-
orthogonally,
Yeah, because this team's here, what's that here?
you've mentioned it a couple of times today. One of mine and your favorite words, high agency.
Yeah.
Why are you so obsessed with high agency people? Why is it important?
Because it's applied optimism, I guess. Without it, nothing changes. And we was at dinner last night with Jared, and we was saying I asked for reference for the audience, he recruits like high level execs. And I asked him, what do all these guys have in common when you get to like that Uber level of big companies? And he said like energy transference. And high agency for me is a combination of energy transference, the ability to either just accept the story or change the story. And then you have this kind of debate. Again, you can have these two thoughts in your head at the same time of the great man theory of history, or kind of things just happen societally and change that way. And again, I think there's truth to both, but ultimately at the individual level, having a sense of agency is extremely valuable. And these figures, like one of my favorite questions to ask is, what films aren't we making because we're too busy making Transformers 12? And if you actually look at all my work, it's often questions rather than answers. It's my favorite Oasis lyric is, questions are the answers you might need. And often in this platform, it's a guru platform. You can give these easy platitudes. I actually prefer to ask a question and then leave that open loop with the audience and then go, hey, here's my answer to the question. But then you may get, and hopefully we do, you get a lot of DMs from people going, actually, this is the story that they should be making instead of Transformers 12. Have you heard about this person? Have you heard about this person? Or have you heard about this story? Well, you're
crowdsourcing the insights.
Exactly.
Right?
And I think that's such a better way. It goes back to what we said at the beginning. That's an infinite game, where if you try and go, I think X, Y, Z's true, and I have this guru insight of ABC, versus having a question of an open loop, those are questions that you can kind of answer over a career and still never answer. It's an infinite game.
Okay, so high agency is the ability to change, to enact change. If it was to be in a single sentence, I would say it's that.
Yeah, I think low agency is life happening to you. High agency is you happening to life. I'd say that's the fundamental difference. And you'll know people who life happens to them, and then you know people who happen to life. And ultimately, it's a constant battle. You can have the most high agency person, Steve Jobs, who dies of pancreatic cancer. Obviously, there's stuff around the carrot juice and things like that, but ultimate environments still have a factor, but it's the ability to have that double think and know, okay, well, I can still have the most amount of optimism, still the most amount of high agency, and have an impact. Environments are still going to have a huge impact too.
So who are some of your favorite high agency humans throughout history?
Going back to what I said earlier of what films aren't Hollywood making right now because they're making Transformers 12 or Fast and Furious 15. The most underrated one in terms of how few people know and the most high agency individual is a guy called Rudolf Verber. So Rudolf Verber was in Auschwitz as a teenager. He was in a unique position where he was essentially in the operations of the train. So he would help Jews come off the trains, particularly women and children, and then they get exported to the gas chambers. One of the things, like a meta principle I'd say today that I've kind of massively changed my mind in the last 24 months is when you study history, you begin to understand things completely differently. So when I go into this Rudolf Verber story, the thing that people don't appreciate is they view it in hindsight versus at the time. The Nazis didn't announce to people, hey, get on these trains and this is what's going to happen to you. That wasn't the case. And as a result, lots of other governments who were fighting the war against them didn't even know that was the case. There was a few people who suspected it was, but it's only in hindsight do we know that. So he then began to see, he was one of the few people that knew, who wasn't on the Nazis team, that could see this just killing machine that was happening. And okay, so you can imagine here, talk about pessimism, has every reason to be pessimistic. He's seeing the worst of humanity that's ever existed. Talk about agency. He's literally a prisoner. And if you try and escape Auschwitz, they will just essentially, if they find you, they'll put out a 3-day dog squad. They will hunt you down and they will hang you in front of everybody else just to show what happens to you. So he teamed up with Alfred Wetzler. Actually, just to rewind for a second, the most harrowing thing about his story, going why he could be so pessimistic and so low agency, is he meets a girl in the concentration camp called Alice Monk and loses his virginity in the concentration camp, and then she gets killed the next day in the gas chambers. And he kept seeing that. And again, talk about pessimism, talk about low agency, every single reason to be, but decided, you know what, fuck it, I'm going to try and escape. So he teamed up with Alfred Wetzler, and essentially what they did was there was some wood just outside the camps that they hid under these barrels of wood. Boom, the Nazis, as they're counting in at the end, they go, where's 44070? Because they take their names from them, so they just have numbers. Where are they? They released the dog squad, and they hid under these barrels of wood. the most high agency part of it, they cover themselves in gasoline and tobacco. So the Nazi dogs couldn't find them, even though they were right literally on the perimeter. There's one point where they almost find him and he has a knife because he's about to take his own life. Okay, they don't find him. 3 days goes by. They haven't ate. They've kind of stayed awake. They escape. They sprint as fast as they can, run all the way through Slovakia. No Google Maps.
Through Slovakia.
In concentration camp uniforms where everyone surrounding them are Nazi sympathizers because that's what they put in place. With no Google Maps, no Uber, no WhatsApp to chat to the squad. You know what I mean? Like, this is like the most harrowing thing where, and if they get caught, killed immediately. Run, I think it's like 100 or so miles through, get all the way there. And then the most beautiful part is kind of the few things that happens afterwards. So one, rather than write an incredibly emotional report, which he should have done, like they killed the girl he lost his virginity to, right? It's dark. He could tell them like they killed the girl I loved. They wrote the most objective McKinsey-like report of this killing machine that was Auschwitz. And that people didn't believe him for quite a while. Again, rather than rest on his laurels, this guy goes and joins the Slovakian army, and they say, we're not going to give you a pistol, we'll give you a machine gun because of like the kind of guy you are, just based off his fucking story.
Yeah, we don't give boys like you pistols.
Yes, we give them machine guns. So that's the kind of guy, again, just escaped that, but he's back on the front line. The beautiful thing, well, there's the dark side and there's a beautiful side, but the dark side is, because going back to what I said earlier, people didn't understand what was happening at the time. It wasn't believed for a while until Churchill and the Pope ultimately got the report and then began to put more and more pressure on the Nazis. So it was a big factor. They reckon he saved 200,000 lives just from his actions alone. After the war, he goes and lives in America. He's a lecturer at lectures pharmacology. Basically, none of his students know the story of what he did. And the most beautiful thing, I found a YouTube video that has 56 views on it, where this guy who used to know him very well said that everybody, apart from Werber, who he knew that escaped or went through Auschwitz, Werber dressed insanely well because he never wanted that freedom to be taken away from him ever again. So he'd dress in like the most outlandish, amazing suits. And for me, talk about a film that it's better than Transformers 12, better than Fast and Furious 8, but nobody knows who. I mean, a few people do, but most people do not know who he is. And why isn't there a day named after him? It's for me, it's insanity.
The most high agency man of all time.
I think in terms of name to agency ratio, yeah,
name to awareness,
it's Rudolf Werber for sure.
That's very cool. Yeah, I put Dick Fosbury in the TEDx talk that I did a few years ago, and I think that that's a good example as well. Someone who was being maligned in a very different way, but he was mocked, to try and break the existing hegemony that was the scissor kick, I think, was the current one that people were using. And he was an engineer by trade. So he had analyzed what was happening with regards to center of gravity, how you could get yourself as low as possible. And yeah, he was laughed at by everybody. He competed in the Olympics. I think it was maybe Japan or Korea or somewhere like that in the 60s when he did win. He had 2 different pairs of Nikes on. He didn't have the same pair of shoes. And he missed the opening ceremony because he wanted to go to a museum. So this guy was an unbelievable outlier, but he had the courage of his convictions. And I think that that's one of the big differences.
Ooh, it's that idea, which is if you was to go back to 1850 and try and explain the concept of Wi-Fi, it would blow that, but it would not be seen as fathomable. But that idea exists. You just needed a combination of ideas, what we spoke about earlier, and then high agency individuals and humanity working together and compounding. So the question you then think is, well, what is going to be Wi-Fi for us now? There, 100 years from now, however long it's going to be. Oh, that was so obvious. Like one of my favorite examples, which is much more base level, is wheeled suitcases. So before, I think it was 1970s, everybody used to carry their suitcases everywhere. Eric Weinstein has that great bit of the smartest men at the time, the smartest physicist, used to get on the train or the plane carrying their suitcases. And the question is, well, where's the wheeled suitcases right now? There's one guy who comes along and goes, hold on, let's put some wheels on that. Jim Jeffries has a great bit in his new Netflix special where he says, feasibly, Neil Armstrong, as he was getting on the rockets, was there carrying on his suitcases. And goes, one day we'll put a rocket on these without realizing. Okay, it's so and that's, again, going back to questions are the answers that you need. Where is the wheeled suitcase right now? And that's a question that can keep you up at night, where it's so obvious but everyone's just copying the crowd and being mimetic.
So a lot of people will think, I want to be high agency. I want to be around people that are high agency. How can you tell if your friends and the people that you hang with are high or low agency?
I think going back to what we mentioned earlier, which is, do they kind of bend the environment? So no matter what situation you put them in, do they bend it? The dinner last night, he said energy transference. So I had this essay I've never published, which is sofa friends versus treadmill friends. And there's certain friends that I hang around with afterwards, I need to lie on a sofa because they kind of drain you of that energy. And then there's other friends that we mean, where you hang around with them and you're like, fuck, 7-mile run, let's go. We overclock our brains. Like, so I think a big thing that you'll see is energy transference. I always say that Steve from Diary of a CEO, who I used to work at his company, there was this thing where I would walk in the office in the morning and I'd open the door. And bear in mind, Steve could be in a London office, Manchester office, Berlin office, New York office. He's constantly jet setting around. And I go, oh, I could just see from people's faces and how much energy was in the room. I go, oh, Steve's here today, without even seeing him. And I think that's like an often thing is when they enter a room, the energy just completely changes. I think that's an often combination of high agency individuals.
You had weird teenage hobbies.
Weird teenage hobbies is another one. So I often hire for this. Like I can be in a job interview, and if they mention a weird teenage hobby, I kind of lean in quite a lot, which I probably shouldn't say publicly now because now people are going to start bringing those up. But when you're young, especially when you're a teenager, it's probably your most low agency state because you want to copy the crowd. You want to be mimetic of everybody around you. However, if you can, at that age, whilst everyone else is going playing football or rugby, be super into yo-yoing or super into football freestyle or super into whatever it is, for me, that's a good sign. Because if you can swim against the tide when you're 15, or the environment or people mocking you, so much easier as you're an adult.
Well, it's so formative as well, right? A lot of the things that you do in later life are echoes of what you did when you were a kid.
Yeah.
There's a really great study that I looked at that the music that you listen to between the ages of 11 and 15 imprints on you for the rest of your life.
Wow.
So that's why you have generations of music trends that go. Like, I still love emo and post-hardcore because I grew up in like the Hawthorne Heights and Blink-182 era. That was what I listened to, right? And then there'll be other people that'll listen to whatever it might be. God help the people that are growing up now, like Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B. But you've got the golden question as well, which is something that we've used. I think you might have spoken about this on the first ever episode that we did. What's the golden question?
The golden question is, if you were stuck in a third world prison or you were stuck on an island and you had to call someone to bail you out, who would you call? And that alone will identify the most high agency person in your life. Because within that, you need a combination of, some kind of delusional optimism to be able to pull that off. You need some relentless kind of resourcefulness to try and operationalize that. And you're going to need to have that energy transference to be able to convince people or whatever plan you're going to have to put together. So I'd say that is probably the most impactful thing when predicting high agency. One that I see as well is immigrant mentality. So if somebody's moved from their hometown, quite a good sign. If someone's moved from their home country, even greater sign. And you then see these like immigrants across particularly America, right, who absolutely dominate. Because if you can sit there and go, I'm in the wrong place, and so I have to acknowledge I'm in the wrong place. I have to admit, I think everybody else or the people around me, I disagree with their decision, at least for me. And to have the growth mindset to then operationalize a move and start from zero. That in itself is kind of quite a meta story. It doesn't mean that everybody who migrates is high agency, but I'd say it is quite common.
Not being able to predict people's opinions as well, I think, is a huge
one of my
one.
favorites. I have a friend of mine called Catty, and I love hanging around with him because I don't know what he's going to say. Because he doesn't just line up with, for example, like you'll have like the bodybuilder who you'll stereotype them. You probably get this a little bit as well, right? People don't expect you to be in great shape, form a model, and then chat about neuroscience with a guy coming on and hold your own. So I love people when you can't fully predict their opinions, or you have the beauty queen who's super into Nietzsche, or the marketer who's obsessed with the history of war. Whenever someone just falls into that obvious stereotype, makes you think that they haven't thought about things. But when they go, hold on a second, like you was on Love Island, but you're super into chatting about astrophysics. I go, that's probably quite a high agency individual because they've clearly gone against what should be their default programming.
Yeah, if you know one opinion that somebody holds, and from it you can accurately predict everything else that they believe, they're probably not a serious thinker.
No, they're just NPCs just downloading scripts.
But there is somebody out there who falls into the perfect mold of I am pro-life, and I'm pro-gun, and I'm pro-First Amendment, and I'm like small government, and I'm like anti-immigration, and I'm blah, blah, blah. Like you are the complete caricature stereotype of the person that's from the right, and there is the same from the person that's from the left. But most people are so idiosyncratic that you should have something that doesn't fit. It should be this nice smooth circle, except for those two bits. And you're like, what's that doing there? Like, why are you pro-choice but pro-gun? Or why are you like pro-immigration but pro-small government? Like, why did those things go together? And when you find somebody that has a non-typical suite of beliefs, it's interesting because you think, oh, you've arrived at this point on your own. This is one of the things, I did this video about Sam Harris ages ago, 3-4 years ago, why Sam Harris is annoying everybody. It seems like he's like continued like true to form over the last few years. But I have to respect what he's done with regards to that, because he pays an unbelievably high price to hold the opinions that he does, which gives me a great amount of faith that he truly believes in them. It would be much easier for him to fold either one way or the other. Like, it's very untypical to be pro-vax but anti-woke, like anti-Trump but also kind of anti-Biden. Like, you know, he just holds a suite of beliefs that whether you agree with them or not, and almost everybody disagrees with some of them, right? There's very few people that hold the exact same Sam Harris suite of beliefs that Sam Harris does. But the price that he pays to hold them is so high that for me, it's a reliable signal of authenticity, because there are much easier routes to existing in the world than holding that odd conglomeration of views.
It makes you think they've thought it through. And I realize my favorite people to hang around with now, I don't have to agree with them on anything, but have they thought things through? I find that fascinating. And then do they update their beliefs? The other one on the high agency list was, are they mean to your face but nice behind your back? And you often don't see the people who are nice to your face and mean behind your back, because by definition, it's behind your back. So another concept we can come on to is hidden metrics. But on that specific thing, it is a hidden metric. You don't see people being rude behind your back. And I think often a good indication of somebody probably being nice behind your back is probably someone who's mean to your face. Well, at least you know that, and if not, at least they're consistent.
What, people that are nice about other people who aren't there to your face?
Yeah, that's a good one. Or the inverse. Are they amazing friend leaves the room and they go, oh, have you seen what they're wearing, or have you seen XYZ? That's, for me, a sign of, like, it takes a lot of agency to go against gossiping, which is one of the most innate human things.
Correct. Being a gossip tells you as much about the person who is gossiping as it does about the person that they're gossiping about. Because what it tells you is that as soon as the scrutiny of the person that they're talking about is no longer there, they're going to be prepared to talk about you. I've said before, like, the stuff that is on this phone would break the internet for weeks. For weeks, dude. I have shit on there which is like
Ross Ulbricht level. Dread Pirate Roberts.
It's DPR.
Yeah.
But it's my way of going about life that I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm just gonna like hold this secret for the fucking rest of time. That's exciting for me to have. Like, one of the other ones as well, I think, is sending people niche content.
Oh man, going back to the Rudolf Verber story. I found that from one of the talents I have that I can't really monetize is I spot content creators really early on. Going back to the beginning of the conversation, probably listened to you on the first ever episode. It took a while for that penny stock to finally boom. It's doing well now, right? And there's a lot of other examples like that. And one of the low agency things is, okay, this has 6 million views, therefore I will click on it. What I now do is I'll go in the Twitter feed or the YouTube Explore feed or whatever, and I look for things the algorithm is recommending me with like very few views. And I click on that, and 9 out of 10 times it's absolutely a waste of time. But 1 out of 10, you'll tap into something that everybody else isn't tapping into. But by definition, that is the meme of seeing a crowd, like I created that meme of like how to be productive versus how to be creative, and everybody's queuing outside how to be productive, but no one's queuing outside how to be creative. But at a meta level, that's a concept, right? Of what are the things that nobody's clicking on that will then potentially be big in the future. And you have to do that like a VC, where 9 out of 10 of your bets are going to be completely incorrect, but that 1 out of 10 is clicking on a Bitcoin article in 2014.
Yeah, like how many, you've had 30 million views on that Verber story, I think. on Twitter.
Because whereas everyone else is then just regurgitating the same shit. Versus if you can tap into other inputs. That was my big thing about creativity, the essay that went viral on that, which is the problem with creativity is people treat it like productivity, where they just try and do the same thing harder versus try and get as many different inputs into the system as possible. And now YouTube, Explore page, and all these things can just keep you in this hamster wheel versus you need to try and break out
because
and
you're
click
predictable
on different shit and search weird things, and before you know it, you find some bizarre inputs that can either go one way or the other.
Yeah, the niche content thing and looking for different ideas and where do they come from is a really interesting way to conceptualize productivity versus creativity. Really interesting idea to look at there is what's the work environment that you're doing this particular job in. So for instance, if you've ever walked into an artist studio, Zach, my housemate, his missus is an artist, right? So I go into the room where she does her art and there's stuff fucking everywhere. There's like vapes and there's half done sketches, and there'll be like a dog brush, and there'll be like a Bluetooth speaker, but it's like upside down, and there'll be also it's chaos. It's fucking chaos. That is the place that you want to be. And there'll be books and all sorts of other stuff. That's the place that you want to be if you want creative ideas. It's not the place you want to be in if you're doing your taxes.
No.
When you're doing your taxes, you want to be in a nice clean desk. You want to have all of your stuff in front of you. You don't have any distractions. And yeah, the obsession that people have over productivity is so all-encompassing that I don't think many people in the modern world have ever looked at a problem and thought anything except for, I need more productivity. Every single lock gets filled with the key of more focus, more productivity. The reason I can't do this is because I'm insufficiently attentive. Well, sometimes, and maybe even a lot of the time, and this may be a comment on how replicable and almost formulaic a lot of people's jobs are now, that, you know, many roles should be concerned about the forthcoming GPT revolution. But a lot of the time, okay, what's the creative angle to the thing that I'm trying to do? If you're trying to write a book, sometimes you need to sit down and just put your nose against the grindstone because you're not getting the stuff out. But if you're struggling with ideas, you probably need to go for a fucking walk.
Yes. But we come from an institutionalized system, which is the education system, which was designed to create factory workers.
Wondered when we would get onto education. Can't take you anywhere without you blasting the education system.
But so I think that's definitely a factor. But it goes back to that question of where is the wheel suitcases, and constantly asking that at a societal level. But even right now in your very life, like, where is that simple solution that's so obvious, that's just staring you in the face, but because you're trying to be so productive, you can't quite see it?
Yeah, so a good example for me, I've started doing Barry's Bootcamp first thing in the morning. I've been telling you about this. I've been struggling with motivation to train consistently. I can train on a weekend with friends, but training on my own is getting way, way harder. And I think it's because I'm under a fair bit of pressure with the show. And I've known for a very long time that classes, for me, externalize my motivation. They give me a time that I need to be there. They condense down the training into a short period of time. There's a coach that makes sure the programming is done. It outsources everything that I need to do. And I just forgot that was an option. And then one day was walking past Barry's on the way to go to Flower Child, where we went for dinner last night. Thought, I should book in to go there. Sure enough, signed up online, and I've been to tons and tons of classes now. And by 8:30 a.m., I've got 50 minutes of training in. I've done my morning routine. And by 9 a.m., I can be on a call, having trained and done all of my morning stuff. I'm like, wow, even if I'd been at home, I would have struggled to have been as efficient. So oddly, the creative solution has opened up a degree of productivity as well.
The three biggest things I found for coming up with creative ideas are, one, you can get this spinning wheel app on your iPhone. I just search spinning wheel app on the App Store. And collect, going back to questions earlier, just collect great questions that you hear, like, where's the wheeled suitcase right now in my life? And as you collect more and more of those questions, things you hear on podcasts, things people say to you, just spin that wheel before bed, leave it with your subconscious overnight, and then journal on that thing first thing before any inputs. Absolutely fantastic for coming up with ideas. Second biggest one is this idea called Sakoko. I believe I don't know if that's how you actually pronounce it, but I was sat in the Maldives for a week without any inputs, and I came up with this idea, which is if you ask anybody where they want to travel, everybody, certainly I know, or like 90% say Japan. Why is Japan? Why do people want to travel to Japan so much? But if you study the history of Japan, they practice Sakoko, I believe, again, probably butchering the pronunciation, where they closed the borders for 250, 260 years. Anybody who tried to leave and come back, killed. Anybody who tried to enter, killed. And as a result, whilst the rest of the world was trading ideas, it developed this crazy, insane, beautiful, unique culture that there's nowhere else in the rest of the world, and that's why people want to go and visit it, because it's so creative and so new and so unique.
Because it wasn't cosmopolitan, it didn't get diluted down by other cultures.
Exactly, and then go back to the double think idea, though. At the other end of a spectrum is another tool, which is that if you search on YouTube, Swedish House Mafia creating one, and it starts with them like tapping like this. And they go all the way up to them just jamming in a studio, like 3 creative guys, to creating one live in like the space of a minute of the edit. And it's amazing. And you can see like you put 3 people in a room with no inputs from the outside world, and they just pickleball or idea tennis their way to it. So I think spinning wheel helps. Time alone definitely helps, and the longer the better, as well as getting some kind of idea camp with the smartest people you know and shutting out the world that way.
We came up with similar ideas. I came up with anxiety cost, and you came up with thinking cost.
Yeah.
What's thinking cost?
Thinking cost everyone will relate to, which is this idea that your brain is a supercomputer, and you can try this, I'll give this as an experiment to anyone listening right now, try and have 2 thoughts at the same time. And maybe there's the elite IQ guys that me and you definitely aren't, and the Nikola Teslas out there that could do it. But I can't have 2 thoughts at the same time. So with that in mind, you've got this weird thing where you have a supercomputer, but it can only run one program at a time. I call it the human brain paradox. And why this is interesting is when you have super dramatic, super negative people, going back to what we said at the beginning, where ideas are probably the most important thing, it's hard to think about the wheels on suitcases when your girlfriend's round with you about XYZ, or somebody in the WhatsApp chat's kicking off. And then, because what people don't see, which is a hidden metric, but everybody has it. Well, I know I have it, so I think everybody else has it, which is when those events happen, then when you're in the shower, it's running. And it's just eating away that supercomputer's RAM constantly. So there's an opportunity cost that exists for every single thought. So whenever you have a thought, there's trillions of other thoughts that you could be having, but because your supercomputer can only run one program at a time, it's not having. So you've got to have a defense and an offense system, that I think anyway. So the defense system is avoid dramatic people as much as you can. Paul Graham has my favorite essay ever, which is Life is Short. And I read it whenever either anybody gets sick or anybody dies. And he kind of closes the whole thing off of like relentlessly prune bullshit. So just see prune bullshit. Whenever it gets in your life, prune it, purely because there's a thinking cost to everything that you do or every thought that you have. And also but inevitably what will happen is you will still have those dramatic loops that get in there. You can't have a complete defense against them. But then anchor the thought, which is whenever you have a bullshit thought loop that happens, what is the opportunity cost of this thought? Like, what is the wheels on suitcase that I could be thinking about instead? And then you kind of judo throw its momentum against it. So thinking cost is the idea that every thought has an opportunity cost, and you should be hyper vigilant to that.
Yeah, Peterson said the first time I ever brought him on the show about the price that you pay for inaction. Contemplate the price you pay for inaction. You're already in a little hell. You know perfectly well it's going to get worse. The thing about inaction is that you're blind to it. Do not make the assumption that inaction has no price. And this is the same thing, that the thinking cost actually is the price that you pay, but it's so unseen, right? People are prepared to waste the peace of their own mind over and over and over and over again in order to not make a difficult decision, because the difficult decision feels more real. But peace of mind is one of the key desires that almost everybody should be striving toward.
The problem with peace of mind is it's a hidden metric. So if you kind of zoom all the way out, I have a few fundamental questions I keep going back to with all my writing, and then you kind of zoom a bit higher, and it's the optimism high agency thing. And if you actually zoom the highest point, which I've not actually written about just yet, which is kind of viewing everything, going back to Rick and Morty's Roy, or the video game of life, like a simulation hypothesis, but just forked, that's more optimistic, more high agency, which is the video game hypothesis. And one of my fundamental things of this kind of religion/philosophy is metrics are one of the most important things. And one of the reasons why people obsess over money is because money and your bank account is the best video game ever designed. It's multiplayer, competing against other people. Oh, this person makes this much, I only make that much, number going up. And as a result, things like peace of mind, which is a metric that we can't quite measure yet, but we all feel it. We only really begin to look at it when we're in rehab, or when we have an anxiety attack on the bus into work, or whatever it is. And that's why I think hidden metrics, once you see it, well, you never see it, but then once you kind of mentally see it, you begin to see it everywhere. Hormozy has that great bit of the Instagram model. You take the Instagram model, the visible metric's quite clear, right? You get to post on your Instagram, it's great, everyone thinks you're cool. But when you kind of lie in bed at night with somebody who I have nothing in common with you at all.
The Dan Bilzerian problem.
See that, yeah. I'm sure he's happy, but you don't see the hidden metric.
Yeah, why is it that you are such a fan of the Roy scene from Rick and Morty? It's the header on your Twitter, and you've got a hoodie. You've got a custom printed hoodie that I met you on the way to Dubai.
I had a custom mask as well during COVID with Roy on as well. I think it's because it's so one of my favorite things that I began to notice that was happening is you hit 25 and life goes mental. So up from 0 to 25, everybody's on the same path. Pretty much. There's slight variance, but everyone has these guardrails of first year, second year, third year, high school, university. But then you hit 25 and there's so much variance that happens where I have friends that are selling NFTs for ridiculous amounts of money. I've got friends going to prison. I've got friends having a baby. Like there's so much variance that begins to happen and you begin to go, fuck. Religion is quite a useful tool, but as a lot of people who are atheist, agnostic, there's nothing out there that quite exists. And the simulation hypothesis is probably the best we've got. And that's fucking nihilistic, isn't it? Like this idea that there's just infinite versions of me sat in a machine. But if I can move that to like the video game hypotheses, where I began to notice that the laziest people I know, the most nihilistic, pessimistic, low agency people I know could sit and play a video game for 15 hours and be amazing at it. So I have this theory that video game designers know more about human psychology than 99% of psychologists. The video game industry is bigger than music, TV, and entertainment combined. The amount they know about human psychology, I think, is fascinating. So kind of Roy is just viewing life as a video game and trying to shift from first-person shooter of me identifying with this to just third person. Whether it's true or not, probably not. It might not be a video game, but is it a useful belief to have? Probably.
Yeah, I think depersonalizing a lot of things is good. Yeah. Like that's one of Peterson's questions, right? Like treat yourself like you are somebody you are responsible for helping. Like treat your life like a character that you are responsible for playing. It's the same as Rogan's thing. Imagine that you're the hero of your own story. You know, all of these, like what do all of these different ideas have in common? It takes a third person perspective. It depersonalizes a lot of the things that are going on to you because it's very difficult to give yourself. You're so embedded in the experience of being you. And there's so much going on that clouds your ability to make good decisions. That actually being able to have a third person perspective is probably about as close to a superpower as you can be.
And gamification. Like people talk about God is dead. Therefore, what's the point? Why do we do anything? But with a video game, you're not really playing it for any reason, but it's just a fucking game. And I feel there's so much to be unpacked about video game psychology that can get implied. But the biggest thing, or certainly one of the biggest things, is this concept of metrics. When you have a clear metric that people can optimize for, it's like the Cobra effect, wherein the Brits started offering Indians money for cobras because there was such a big problem with them, and then they started breeding them. So you know what a better version of that is? It was to do with rats. Another country, they had a massive problem with rats, and what they said was that they would pay people to bring in rat tails. What they realized was that there was thousands and thousands of tailless rats running all over the city. So that's it. So Kiefer Boy has that concept of pairing metrics, where you have two metrics. So if you have a customer support team and you say, hey, decrease the fraud rate, well, then they start treating every single customer like a potential fraudster. Yeah, you may achieve that goal, but every customer hates you forever.
Yeah, good hearts law, isn't it?
Yes, you need to balance that with an opposing metric. So going back to like the money video game, which is a great video game, but if you could then have peace of mind as an opposing metric, and I wonder if you could literally visualize peace of mind as a dashboard that you could see every single day, I think the impact that would have on people's lives would be so significant.
100%. I mean, you know, this is what people fundamentally don't understand about Hormozy, is that he finds peace of mind through doing business. So, and I didn't understand it until I really, really drilled deep with him. And he may be lying to me and I don't know, but like at least what he says is that he finds his most peace when he's chasing money. So for him, money and peace are the same thing.
Yeah.
But because most people don't have that particular opinion when it comes to their work, they don't have theory of mind to understand what it would be like to be Alex Hormozy. Like, what would it be like for your work and the most peaceful thing that you do to align to the point where you and your partner believe that not having kids is a smarter idea because you can literally serve the world better through legacy, through a company, than you can through children?
Well, I challenge you that people can't empathize with that. They maybe just haven't had it framed to them correctly, where people can always think of a game they played that's so addictive that they end up playing for the sake of playing.
What was some of yours? Did you ever get addicted? You've got your brother's a professional esports player.
He was very, very good. So I saw that firsthand. But for me, football freestyle was my thing, right? So I'd train 4 hours every single night and do that, and then decided I actually want to lose my virginity at one point, so I stopped doing that. So when you have something that you're just doing purely for the sake of doing, I mean, you're doing this with the podcast, right? Yep. We spoke last night and I said, you're the only person I know that would have stuck at it as long as you did without the metric, really. But you was playing it purely for the sake of playing it. But your metric, this is the difference. Your metric wasn't the subscribers or the view count, really, part of it for sure. But I knew if it was, you would have quit. Yeah. But it was purely an infinite game that you was playing. And because it was such a well-designed video game for you, then it keeps going up.
The biggest piece of advice for people that ask about, I want to start a podcast, like, what should I do, or how should I begin, or, what's your piece of advice? And like, if you don't enjoy it, don't do it. Yeah. Because you are not, it's going to take you 150 episodes to earn anything. It's going to take you 400 episodes before you're probably, unless you're got an existing platform, it's going to take you 400 episodes before anybody really cares about what you're doing. It's going to take so long, and that's weekly.
Well, an idea I have with that is pricing things in. So I think it's a hedge fund term where you kind of price in upcoming events. And when you're starting new things like that, so when I take you e-foiling, which people who don't know, it's like a electronic surfing. Everyone saw Mark Zuckerberg go viral with it, which is one of my funniest video games.
You mean DJ Khaled?
DJ Khaled, drop that clip in there, Dean. So with that, one big thing I've now recognized, because I always take new people with me, I'll say to them, I go, you're going to fall off 50 times before you get good at this. Versus if they come at it with just, I'm gonna be good at this immediately, and then they start falling off, it immediately rocks their self-esteem. Whereas if you say, hey, there's gonna be 50 times before you get good at it. Mr. Beast says that as well with YouTube. He goes, just make 100 videos and then we'll chat.
Yeah.
And I think you've got to constantly price in things of go, okay, it's gonna take me 12 months in the gym before I see anything. And if you price that, and I always like really conservative pricing in, because let's say you say 500 episodes, you've got to do your podcast, and you get it at episode 212, you feel great. But if they go in with the mindset of, well, level 1, it's gonna work, therefore. But again, I structure all my Apple Notes to-do lists. So like for every single day, it's the most Lindy thing I've done for years, is level 1, thought dump. Dump everything I've got to do today. Level 2, decide on the levels. And boom, I'm already feeling good. And every project I do will be designed like that, because just me writing down what I've got to do, I've already hit a level. And I can feel that momentum growing. Versus if it's like, have a successful day, I'm constantly trying to play level 32 and failing. So again, it goes back to that.
How do you, given that what you've suggested there is essentially to price in difficulty and to also kind of have low expectations of success, how does that marry with the Skeptic's Guide to Optimism?
Well, it goes back to that 1% every day. It goes back to the secret is bullshit. Like, you're not going to immediately change things. You're going to need to combine optimism, combine agency. But the most important thing is infinite games that you can play for the sake of playing them. That's exactly the thing with Hormozy. At least the impression I have of him, he's doing it like a game. And he wants to do this until he dies. And that's why he can keep playing and keep compounding. Exactly the same with you with this podcast, which is why you didn't quit.
It's going to be very difficult to be beaten by somebody that isn't having fun if you are.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what's that? Tiago Forte. It's incredibly difficult to compete with someone who's having fun.
Yeah.
So that was thinking cost, which was yours. Anxiety cost was similar, but a little bit more acute, a bit more short-term. This is what I'd come up with. So as you identified, you can only have one thought at a time. And by making any kind of decision, inevitably you're going to cut off some of the potential wasted thoughts thinking about that undone task. So let's say every single morning when you wake up, your daily to-do resets, right? I need to walk the dog and meditate and take a shit and speak to my mum, or whatever it is that you do every single day, right? There are certain things that you do every single day. The longer that you wait to do those things, the more time is taken up thinking about the fact that you haven't yet done those things, which is an argument for front-loading stuff into your morning, right?
Versus the interest rate constantly
Yeah.
to repay that.
Every single time that you think, I need to meditate today, I need to meditate today, I need to meditate today, could have been, that's wasted thinking cost or anxiety cost, as I called it, that you could have fixed by simply meditating when you woke up. And looking at your day, not only through ebbs and flows of energy, but also in terms of what captures a lot of my thought, what causes me stress, how can I get that so that it's, and not only, here's the other thing, not only do you get to gain not thinking about the thing and being anxiously concerned that you still need to do it, you also get to sort of bask in this beautiful self-righteous glow from your high horse of productivity because you went out and you fist fucked it first thing in the morning. It's perfect. So next stuff, razors. Both massive fans of razors. You did a super thread, and one of the, I've selected some of my favorites. I've added in some of mine as well. The first one, bragging razor. If someone brags about their success or happiness, assume it's half what they claim. If someone downplays their success or happiness, assume it's double what they claim. The map is not the terrain.
100%. And there's obviously exceptions to the rule, but I think that's quite a consistent rule that I see. When I hear someone, particularly if it's money or if it's things like that, when they're bragging overtly, I'm like, probably don't really believe this. But if someone's kind of playing it down and there's a few subtle tells, it's the classic midwit meme, right? You've got probably my favorite meme of all time, which is the low IQ guy on the left, the kind of midwit in the middle, and the super high IQ guy there, where the low IQ guy says, I'm the guy on the left. The guy in the middle says, I'm the guy on the right. And the guy on the right says, I'm the guy on the left. So, and you see this with wealth as well, where you see the super rich try and hide their wealth, whereas it's the kind of people who are like the money Twitter crowd that are trying to screenshot their Shopify store and things like that, where it's, why are you trying to signal that? When you're trying to overtly signal, you're probably trying to compensate for something. Again, there's exceptions to the rule, but when someone's signaling so hard, it's probably a sign that they don't have it.
We were in a location in Austin over the weekend, and a gentleman came up to us, and one of the first sentences out of his mouth was, 1,500 people in the world have started a $1 billion business. I'm one of them. Like, now I believe you even less now.
Anyone who's seen Carl Pilkington's bullshit, man.
You wanted to go
bullshit.
Yeah, I think what it kind of suggests when somebody does steam in and start with achievements first is, or any kind of bragging basically suggests to us it's a low status, very easy to fake signal of authenticity, right? Like a hard signal of authenticity would just be, show me your bank balance or show me your capacity. Someone telling you how smart they are is way less reliable of a signal than someone having a conversation with you that flows perfectly and you think, holy fuck, like that's really cool. So yeah, we're into personality quirks here around people's desire to be seen and their needs for validation from the world around them. But I think generally the bragging razor of thinking, if I want to come across well, allowing my achievements to arise as a byproduct of someone asking me about what I do. This is another thing that happens in Austin that I had to introduce you to, which is, since I've been here, when you join a new group at a party or a gathering or whatever, and you get introduced by the one person that you probably do know in that circle, they usually tell the group what you do, and that allows everyone to bypass the bragging razor because your friend bigs up your best achievements. But again, it's a reliable adjudicator, presumably. I'm not going to lie about what, he's got a 17-inch penis and I'm pretty sure that he's got the world high jump record and he's like the first man on the moon. Like, I'm not going to say that, right? I'm going to say the things reliably that people can assume. So next one, I love this one. Instagram razor. When you see a photo of an influencer looking attractive on Instagram, assume that there were 99 worse variations of that photo you haven't seen. They just picked the best one.
100%. And me and Josh, my business partner, when we travel around, we'll be in sometimes very nice restaurants and we see the beautiful couple. Like, I don't think it's them necessarily, but the kind of Tommy Fury, Molly May looking couple, not referring to them. And he's just kind of there staring into the distance. And she'll be there just going through her phone of like infinite photos of her. And then
on Visco, trying to find the right filter.
One of the biggest red pills I had recently was where I was at a bar, and then I looked over, and there's a girl on a photo of herself, and she was face tuning it live in real time. And I now realized it's the classic, where's the sausage made? And you got to realize that everything on Instagram that you see is absolute. It's just not true. It's the metaverse. It really is the metaverse. Everyone's an Animoji character, completely edited. It's bizarre.
I love the fact that you have to assume as well that this is the best option out of what everybody had. And especially if it's someone that's got a pretty well curated Instagram feed. That I suppose that's one of the advantages of, as you get to a particular level with creating content online, you don't even know what's going out. It's, the spin the wheel thing. I have no idea what video goes out each day. Like the Shorts team finds things that they love. And sometimes they'll be like, oh, this bit with Mark Normand was really fun. Like you should maybe put that out. But they treat me like a child. Like they've got a strategy and they know what they're doing. So I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll just like fucking close your eyes and put your hand in the celebrations tin and pull out, today it's a bounty, tomorrow it's a Malteser.
A good razor as well, kind of related to this, is both these razors are trying to avoid signals and then try and actually study the noise. So like not the noise, sorry, but the actual thing. So meta games I think are super important because you can learn a lot. So I have this rule, which is if I want to work with a personal trainer, I want the personal trainer to be in insane shape. And that's way better than any marketing spiel he can give for me. If I see a SaaS product which is selling landing page software, I want, when I click on their landing page, for that software to be incredible. Like the landing page should look. If you're the landing page software guy and your landing page isn't great, that's a sign. One of my heroes throughout history in a marketing space is David Ogilvy, and David Ogilvy, I forgot which magazine it was. They wrote a headline which is David Ogilvy a genius? ? And Ogilvy was a great marketer because the way he marketed himself, he replied to that headline by getting his lawyer to sue them for the question mark. Or at least that's the story that he released. And I go, even within that, you can see how good he is at marketing. He doesn't have to say, like, what he's done there is genius. So whenever you can study these meta games, which is not what people say, what they do, or how they carry themselves, is super, super important.
Narcissism, Razor. If you're worried about people's opinions, remember they are too busy worrying about other people's opinions of them. 99% of the time, you're an extra in someone else's movie.
Yeah. And then that's when you realize everybody else has a separate video game that they're playing. And they're too busy. When you're thinking about them and you're worried about them, assume the amount of thought you give to other people, they're giving to you. And then you realize how delusional that is. One of my friends was chatting about envy recently, and he was talking about how he wants to get rid of envy as a thing. And I go, one thing that's useful with envy is to realize that there's somebody out there who's so envious of you, who probably checks your Instagram, checks all these things, and constantly is thinking about you. And when you view it through that frame, you go, Jesus, that's really bad. I'm actually not that worthwhile being envious of. And you realize, oh shit, everybody else thinks the way I think. And that then enables you to go to like third person shooter and begin to zoom out and just see, oh, I'm not that important.
No, there's that quote of, we would care far less about what other people thought of us if we realized how rarely they did. There's this other one. Did you see that story about Churchill that I posted of the young guy who was showing around the Houses of Parliament? No. This was good. So a young MP was being shown around Parliament by Winston Churchill. As he wandered through the halls and offices, he asked questions about how the building was put together. Churchill obliged and gave the young man advice on how this world worked. Upon entering the House of Commons chamber, Churchill's new friend started referring to the MPs on the other benches as the enemy. Churchill reportedly said, "That's the opposition, dear boy. The enemy's behind you." And what I loved about that was it became, obviously what he's talking about is the fact that like the people who you need to be concerned about are the ones that are on your team because you have something that they want. That's the opposition. You know that they're out to get you. It's the people behind you that are the snakes that'll stab you in the back. But figuratively or symbolically, I think that I love that story because it reminds us that we are our own worst enemy most of the time, that we see the world as being some sort of adversary that is trying to do things against us. The world gives zero fucks about you. Yeah. The world doesn't care less. Literally, the entire universe is indifference to all of our existence, right? No, not a blind blink. And I imagine that this is one of the reasons why when we get to look at the night sky, it fills us with a degree of dread and awe and insignificance that I think is very important to keep our egos small, because we realize that everything's just going to keep on turning. But also, this goes back to the cynicism, skepticism thing. You can personify the world as being a thing. You hear people say stuff like this, like, the world is an evil and mean place and it will try and break you down. I've even nodded as Goggins said something similar on the podcast. And there are degrees to how it can be useful to see, to be alert to threats out there and to have resilience ready for things that are difficult to occur in the world. But the world's fucking indifferent to you. The world doesn't care. And personifying it and creating an enemy out of the world, I think, is pointing the finger in the wrong direction. It's like, it needs to be turned inward. You are the person that knows all of your weaknesses. You can say the most disgusting, terrible things to yourself. You know all of the trigger points that you should go through. You chastise yourself for falling short, even though you've tried your hardest. Like, you are your own worst enemy. There will never be anybody that can be as brutal to you as you can to yourself. Realizing that helps you to ameliorate this adversarial view of the world. The world's just a tool.
Yeah.
It doesn't care about you. There are some people out there who genuinely have enemies, right? But it's a rarefied strata of people, and they've done something.
Tinder swindler.
Tinder swindler. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think, so there's the nihilistic version of that, or it could be framed as nihilistic pessimistic, which is, well, nobody cares about you, and therefore it's like, well, what's the fucking point then? But it goes back to the root opening of the conversation, which is ideas are probably more important than people. The concept of electricity is so important, or the idea of critical thinking, or whatever it is. This is why ideas are so much more important. And you can find, as an atheist or an agnostic, you can find God to some extent in these ideas as something that's way bigger than you, that can last way longer than you, that is so damn important.
There was one that I came up with. This is my first one. I'm adding it into the mix, which you'll have seen before. Schultz's razor. Do not attribute to group conspiracy that which can be explained by cancellation anxiety.
So that's a fucking great one. There's the Cummings razor as well, which kind of forks on that idea, which is Balaji, one of my favorite followers on Twitter, tweeted out, why doesn't every government in the world have a dashboard so you can see how well they're doing? It is like, think of the core metrics, and you could debate over the core metrics. You could even debate how you measure them, and maybe have different parties and things like that. But all the core measurements, number of homeless people on the street, obesity rates, death rate. Why don't we have a BBC 5 channel where you can just tune in like a CEO checking their dashboard? And we don't operate that way. And Dominic Cummings, Boris's former right-hand man, retweeted that and said, and I call this Cummings razor, which is whenever you get confused by politicians or you think it's some great conspiracy theory, it's basically this, which is Cummings wrote, I can confirm at the time Boris does not have a dashboard that he checks every day. It's not run by like a CEO. He just reacts to newspaper stories that come in each day. If everybody saw this, they'd sell everything and flee. And that's a fundamental problem is, there's not actually a lot of malice that's going on. It's just a complete lack of strategy, design, everything.
Gwinder had a post today that was money. The idea of sinister elites controlling everything is popular because it's more comforting than the truth that even our leaders don't know what they're doing and society is ruled mostly by chance. So good. There was this other idea called compensatory control. Do you remember I taught you about this ages and ages ago? Compensatory control. So it's another Richard Shotton here. So he was talking about how people that were very early on, before there was reason to believe that it was a lab leak, people were attributing to global conspiracy the fact that we had this pandemic that was released. Like, the people that were right weren't right because they were educated. They were right because they were closing their eyes and throwing it at a dartboard, if they were right at all. Compensatory control. When we feel uncertain, when randomness intrudes upon our lives, we respond by reintroducing order in some other way. Superstitions and conspiracy theories speak to this need. It is not easy to accept that important events are shaped by random forces. This is why, for some, it makes more sense to believe we are threatened by the grand plans of malign scientists than the chance mutation in a silly little microbe. We just want to personify. You see what it's that personification again as well. And one of the big reasons is that the world is chaotic. We try to bring order to that chaos by personifying it. So many different things that we could do. What should we focus on? Where should I put my time? Am I doing it right? Am I doing it right? Please just tell me if I'm doing it right. And as soon as you can create a narrative, it's no longer random chaos. Oh, there's a story. It's like Harry Potter. Or it's like Succession, or it's like Pretty Little Liars.
Going back to what we said earlier, you can never guess their opinions for high agency people. One of the things I love is as soon as somebody kind of, and I can be guilty of this as well, I'm sure you can, but as someone kind of steamrolls with their identity belief or whatever their team sport is, it's just, if you had to give the best version of the other team's opinion, what is it? Then you just see it crumble. A lot
is that Munger's razor?
It's like steelmanning something. You just completely see it crumble. And a lot often they'll go, well, there is no argument for it. And it's like, well, therefore, this is...
That is the most insane perspective that totally disregards the fundamental way that humans work. If you believed the same things that your opponent believed, you would be convinced by it too. Yeah. As soon as you can be convinced that 2 + 2 = 4, you can no longer unsee the fact that 2 + 2 = 4 until somebody convinces you of something else. Like, you don't get to choose to be convinced, right? You just are. It just happens. Now you can refuse to listen to things. You can be boneheaded around stuff. But once you're convinced, that's it. It's game over. So understanding that if you were that person, you would have that belief as well. I don't mean in a we have no free will determinism type scenario, that their particular suite of understandings and worldview perspective has resulted in them believing this thing, which is counter to what you believe. I learned this from Gwinder as well. He's coming back on in a couple of weeks. Rogerian rhetoric. So it's kind of like the... what's the dialogue method that the Greek philosopher came up with? Was it Aristotle? Or people are going to be screaming into their AirPods. Anyway, there's this like the Socratic method. Fuck for that. Rogerian rhetoric's kind of a little bit like the Socratic method, but it's more investigative. So you're almost trying to work out what's true through asking questions. And there isn't, Socratic method seems to be more like asking questions so that this person arrives at the outcome that you want them to. It's like, the earth being flat, like, could you maybe think that it could be due to this? Could it maybe be due to that? Could it maybe, and you try to guide somebody toward an outcome. Rogerian rhetoric seems to be less biased. It's got less of an agenda to it. And, I love that as an outcome, because you're like, I just want to find out. I just want to know. I want to know what that person believes, because if I believed it, I would be convinced too.
Yeah, leaning in with curiosity versus like immediate judgment is, and sometimes you may change your mind. And I feel you can see that at like a political level or a societal level, but then you zoom in all the way at the micro, and everyone can relate to this, where go on, search facebook.com if you're old enough, and click on your old profile and go back 5 years, and you'll cringe. For whatever reason, you will cringe, whether it's the outfit you wore, the person you was dating, the opinions that you had. And if you aren't cringing, then you definitely should be, because you haven't evolved as a human being. However, you then have to price in, fucking hell, 5 years from now, what am I going to be thinking? And that's one of the things, if you can start skipping ahead to that question now versus waiting the 5 years, maybe you actually get to that point in a year or two.
The worst thing is, man, when you do this game, which both of us have done lots, right? What in 5 years' time is the wheels on the suitcase of my life that I should be looking at right now? Where are the blindingly obvious changes that I need to make, that I'm going to wish that I did earlier, that I'm going to wish that I committed myself to? If you do the game of what do I wish that me 10 years ago changed, altered, did, adjusted in terms of texture of existence or the way that I perceive the world, lots of those are still going to be the same ones that you need to do now for 10 years' time.
Yeah, like it's the same pattern. It's the same. Waitskin has that idea of bridging the gap, where the mistake he made 5 years ago, it'll be a theme of something that will keep occurring. And yeah, the actual specific mistake may change, but it could even just be the fact that I keep thinking I figured out the answer. So you look back at yourself 5 years ago, well, thank fuck, I figured it out now. But you've not priced in the 5 years from now, you're going to go, oh, thank fuck, I've actually figured it out now. And it's the same thing each time. Going back to the Sekoko thing, I had the weirdest one. Again, a lot of alone time can both be great, but also very bad.
Preaching to the quiet
I don't know where this idea is. I think it's either my greatest idea or my worst idea yet. And I thought about turning it into a guided meditation, which is, meditation's useful. You can kind of observe yourself. But as atheists, agnostics, people who don't have an immediate religion to fall into, they don't have really any alternative to prayer. And I really like the kind of Jeff Bezos deathbed minimization framework, as well as the kind of Roy, it's just a video game. And I came up with this thing. I was just sat there with no phone, no nothing. My mind's just wandering. And a little bit of Christmas Carol thrown in there, where you calm your breathing and you skip ahead 70 years in the future. and you kind of go, fuck. You take off the VR headset, and you now, as you are now, listening to this podcast was just a complete VR trip. You're actually 85 years old, and you're in the worst care home imaginable. And as your eyes slowly open, you begin to realize, and you try and embody this and feel the emotion, that you're you if all your worst traits took over, if all your pessimism took over, if all your low agency took over, if all your isolating yourself from your friends and bitching about people, everything that you can think about your worst version of yourself took over. You're in a care home where there's fucking cockroaches on the floor and the nurses never come in to see you. And as you stumble around, you're just repeating all the mistakes that you've made in your head, repeating all of them, and like physically feel that emotion. And then as you're feeling that intensity, you get a knock on the door. You move over with your Zimmer frame and your hips that feel like you've just run a marathon the day before. And standing back as you open the door is the absolute best version of yourself. And for whatever reason, he's lean. He's got none of the injury issues. He's just
built like RFK.
Yeah, he's built like RFK in his prime. He's on all the creatine, right? He looks fantastic. And he pulls up an iPad and he plays you all the fucking amazing memories where the best version of you took over. And you feel that emotion to such an extreme intensity of that envy that you have for the best version of yourself. And you look over and there's a clock on the wall and there's just 5 minutes ticking. It's how long you've got left to live. And the emotion then intensifies. But before the best version of yourself, before the RFK version of yourself walks out, he says, okay, if I could give you the ability to go back in time now, what would you do? And he goes, I'll give you all my money in my bank account. He goes, okay, let's do it. Let's do the trade. However, you have to give me one thing today that you're going to show the best version, and write that down and then actually action it. And I started doing that. And it's like, fucking hell. Almost got like crying in a Starbucks one day.
Yeah, you warned, you put an information hazard warning before posting that online, which I think is probably worthwhile. It's a pretty intense thing to do. Are there any realizations, are there any changes that you've made from that aren't so personal that you can share?
Yes. I think really just thinking in much longer time horizons. So thinking, okay, well, if I go to that 80, 90-year-old self, I really want to play games that I can play forever, or that I can play for a long period of time, that are video games that I can set up that compound out as well. So I've kind of changed a lot of the way I think, the way I operate, the way I work around that.
Much more long-termism view.
Much more long-termism, because that's where all the gains are. That's what you said to me last night of, if anybody with a bit of talent, a bit of IQ, a bit of everything sticks out something for 5 years like you did, like playing the video game without the scoreboard going up, but stick it, and then boom, the compounding game happens. Like, what percentage of your audience has come in the last 12 months? It's like 90%?
More.
That's insane, right?
Yeah.
It's so hard for people that come from going back to the education system, an education system like that, to comprehend how things compound all of a sudden. But when you can zoom out and play those long-term games, they can compound. And the beautiful thing is, going back to it, is even if your podcast never took off, even if this thing never worked out and it's still me and you just making another episode, we still have to go, oh, that was fucking fantastic.
Yeah,
you still had fun, which is the kind of beauty. So if you can find a game that you can play forever, A, you'll probably end up making a lot of money, and then B, worst case scenario, if you don't, at least it's a fun video game anyway.
The early late raiser. If it's a talking point on Reddit or Twitter, you might be early. If it's a talking point on LinkedIn or Facebook, you're definitely late.
Yeah, that's a confirmation. There's I try and think quite a lot about future trends, and as a result, you end up going back to what I said earlier. It's VC bets. 9 out of 10 will be wrong, but 1 out of 10 will be right. And the biggest thing I have is the amount of trends I've spotted that came via Twitter, and how far ahead you can live by living on the right Reddits, the right Twitters, and even now it'll be like WhatsApp chats, Telegram chats, things like that. And you can literally see it slowly go all the way through and then hits peak mainstream when it's on Facebook or when it's on LinkedIn.
Dude, I did this the other day. This was from this week's newsletter, and I think I told you about this one too. The parental clout gauge.
I don't know this one.
Do you know how I know when a news story has reached genuine mainstream significance? It's not when it trends on Twitter or hits daytime news or lands on front pages. It's when my dad messages me on Facebook about it. I see your colleague, Mr. Rogan, has been in the news again. He also sent me one toward the back end of last year saying that Andrew Tate, spelled T-A-I-T, that Andrew Tate's a nasty piece of work, isn't he? And I was like, oh God, Tate, you've really gone full mainstream now.
Yeah, that's a good rule of thumb. I think as well, one thing I've taken, so there's a book called The Sovereign Individual, which is a fantastic book, predicted a lot of future trends. and they have within that, which is this concept that if when the Roman Empire fell, which I think is in like 476 AD or whenever, they didn't acknowledge it at the time. Like, it wasn't people going around, the Roman Empires fell. It was only with the historian's glaze that we could acknowledge, that's when the Roman Empire will fall. And this idea, I don't think the American Empire is ending by any stretch of the imagination, but one day, I assume, it will end. And the concept that you think you'll go on CNN one day, and they'll go, oh, by the way, today the American Empire ended. No, what will happen is it'll be 70 to 80 years afterwards. Historians will declare, oh, it's when X happened that it ended. And that's the reason why you really can't outsource things to the news, because if you wait for the news to tell you, you'll either be late or you'll be wrong.
Thinking about how this reflects and works for the personal as well, I learned this from Mark Manson. Identity lags reality by 1 to 2 years. There's a lot of psychological fallout from a rapid change in status. And this kind of relates to the what will you in 5 years think about you today? What do they wish that you had known? Only in retrospect do our lives make sense a lot of the time. So that quote about the funny thing about life is that it needs to be lived forward, but it only makes sense in reverse. And identity lags reality by 1 to 2 years means that you are permanently playing catch up, especially if you have big changes in lifestyle and personal growth. You know, everybody that's listening to this podcast is working on personal growth. They're trying to become better people every single day, which is beautiful, but it's very unstabilizing. Very, very unstabilizing because, you know, within the space, what's that? Every 7 years, every single cell in your body has changed, right? It's the ship of Theseus idea that you can replace each individual plank on this ship. And after long enough, like, is it the same ship? And there's also a way that girl breakup meme pages have used this to be like, girl, don't worry, after 7 years there won't be a cell in your body left that was around when you were with him, which is actually kind of a nice way to think about it, I suppose, if you're trying to get over a bad breakup. But it's very destabilizing to have all of this stuff happening, right? And especially if identity lags reality by 1 to 2 years, it's really, really tough. Okay, so who's me? What does it mean to be me? Right? What does it mean to be me? Like, who am I? Am I the me that I aspire to be? Am I the me that I am now? Am I the me? Like, it's a very, very destabilizing world to be in. And I think that trying to future-proof yourself by thinking carefully, by reflecting carefully on what it is that, what the universal rules are that you're trying to follow, I think is a much safer way to go about things.
Yeah, I think the more rules of thumb and razors that you can just have, the more useful that is. Brian Johnson,
Which one?
Good point.
Here's a point. I don't know a single name that has more people in the public eye attached to it than Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson, singer of AC/DC. Brian Johnson, guy that started Optimize.me. Forgot about him, didn't you? About him, yeah. Brian Johnson. Hey guys, Brian here. Brian Johnson, the Liver King. Brian Johnson, the longevity expert. In the marketing space, that's what we call an SEO warfare. that is difficult, isn't it? I'm on about the longevity expert, where he has the 4 p.m. Is it 4 p.m. Brian or 5 p.m. Brian? Yes,
where he's fired him. He doesn't let him make a decision. But yeah, I think the more rules of thumbs that you can have, it simplifies things. And then I actually think the ultimate hack we've been speaking about a lot whilst I've been here is who you are around. And I know that's the kind of oldest Dale Carnegie trope, but the mimetic forces. I wrote this essay a while ago, which is cognitive biases are a bit of a scam, or they've been sold incorrectly. So cognitive biases...
Don't tell Shane Parrish.
Cognitive biases, I think you'll agree, which is cognitive biases are pessimistic and low agency, versus you can actually just reframe them. Same way you take the simulation hypothesis and end up with the video game hypothesis, you can reframe them up to the optimism high agency stack and its cognitive superpowers. So you can just move things like, so mimesis. Everybody talks about mimesis often in a negative frame, like, oh, you just copy your desires from other people, and there's some truth to that and there's some beauty to that. But also, you can actually use that as a fucking tool. And maybe a lot of these things have actually been designed not as cognitive biases, but things that are very
hyperbolic discounting. Well, you've managed to reverse that. What's the name that you've given to the studied by historians question? Have you named it yet?
Oh, the what is ignored by...
Yeah, have you named that?
Yeah, so what is ignored by the media that will be studied by historians, and then people point out, well, there was this one example where the media mentioned this. The whole thing of it is the media historian gap. So what is super prominent, what is not prominent in the media right now that I think will be humongously portioned up by history? And there's so many things. When you begin, again, it's another question, it's another open loop that you leave with the audience, and versus like, oh, this is the thing. Here's my answer.
I've got a list of 10. Yeah. The headline death gap.
the headline death gap. So this is an image, maybe Dean can whack it on the screen, of what headlines say will cause your death or what they focus on versus what will. And obviously terrorism is like off the charts, things like that are off the charts, versus heart disease gets almost no mention in the media and it is absolutely humongous. I have this bit that you did with Peter Attia where the mortality gap between smoking and non-smoking is...
Smoker and a non-smoker is 40%. The mortality gap between the bottom 25% of exercise fitness and the top 2% is 400%.
So here's a question for you, an open loop for you. Where's the great pro-exercise campaigns right now? If it's 10x or however much x the difference, and if we can save that many lives, there's because I collect like the best ads of all time, and there's one in there which is like smoking, and there's an actual study on smoking ads that the US government did. It saved millions of lives, they expect. So where's the pro-exercise campaigns? They don't exist. They should exist. Based purely off that data alone, they should exist en masse.
The reason that the question is interesting, and I've called it Mack's Teal question, because Peter Thiel's question of what do you believe that most people would find abhorrent or most people would disagree with?
It's like, yeah, what do you believe that everybody else essentially disagrees with you on? Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Which I feels like again, like everything, I'm a fucking budget version of, much budget version of
Peter
Thiel,
Thiel. Yeah, so, not even as gay.
No. Who knows, the night's young, right? So on that point, yeah, the media historian gap, and then you begin to see it everywhere. It was more like a point of annoyance where I just see these things and go, why is that not getting discussed? And it goes back to opportunity cost as well, where what are the things that we aren't discussing because we're focused on things like that, the more important things.
Fast and Furious 10. Well, I mean, we've said this. Actually, this is an interesting one. I used to say 5 years ago, most of the greatest minds of the 21st century have had their time working out how to get people to click on ads.
Yeah.
But that changed about 3 years ago to many of the greatest minds of the 21st century have had their time taken up arguing about whether men are men and women are women or not, which is also true. Like, Jordan Peterson, very formative for me during my intellectual awakening from man-child to adult infant. And I love his insights around the existential pain of living. I don't go to him for insights around Sports Illustrated models. There's just better things. And the weird thing about some of the ideologies that have captured attention of the opposite side. So you understand about how cultural memes are also evolved too, right? That the ones that are built to propagate and to be continued are the ones that stick around, and there are other ones that don't, right? Cultural memes act the same way that genetic genes do too. But there's something that happens on the opposite side of the fence that it causes. The effective cultural memes that stick around are good at triggering a response from the other side. They trigger an antibody response, which further propagates the meme because it lends more credence to it. Now, sometimes I suppose the opposing side could keep on battering away to the point where it gets destroyed. I think the word woke and the word politically correct are two good examples of that comedians used it to, it was so quickly turned from non-ironic to ironic and mocked through satire that no one uses the word woke in a non-ironic way anymore. Everyone that uses it is using it as a piss take. So there are ways that you can repurpose it. It's not an argument to never push back against bad ideology, but it is an argument to realize that if you start to play the game of the other side, whatever side you're on and whichever side you hate, if you begin to play their game by pushing more attention toward what they're doing, you do, it's like a hydra. It like just chop one of their heads off and it grows two more.
Well, if you look at kind of the root structure of the conversation today, if you actually zoom out, it's constant gaps, right? So you've got the media historian gap, you've got the thinking cost gap, the gap between what I should be thinking about versus that. And the beautiful things is that these are questions are the answers that you need. These are questions that you can kind of explore. For the Transformers, Fast and Furious gap, right? Like what's the media focusing on? There's questions that you can kind of explore for a lifetime, as well as it's quite a decentralized thing. It's the audience can then participate. Well, you can constantly update that model versus, hey, here's the answer.
I would love to create a page of some kind. I guess it can just happen in the comments, but it would be great for you to put a page out, what is neglected by the media but will be studied by historians. If you crowdsourced that.
Yeah, that'd be a fascinating one. And then you can obviously retrospectively see it throughout time as well. There's so many of those gaps. There's another one that two that I have at the minute, which is what what problems aren't we solving because capitalism can't solve them?
What like?
I think we spoke about this one, cyberbullying. I think that's a really difficult problem for capitalism to solve,
because the incentives align to get people to be online.
Yeah, that's a real difficult one, and I think therefore you've got to maybe have some kind of X Prize idea or something outside the box for that. I have another one which is like the product marketing gap, which is most people think they hate marketing, but they don't. They just hate it when marketing is better than the product.
The secret or optimism.
Exactly that. And one thing I'd leave with the audience I'd recommend. I always recommend this. My friend Julian Shapiro sent me it, which is this documentary, Searching for Sugar Man. You've still not seen it, have you?
No.
That angers me to no end.
Sorry.
We'll watch that tonight. So Searching for Sugar Man, spoiler alert, is about a musician who was more talented than Bob Dylan. Everyone who worked with him was like, this guy's incredible. He's going to be the next big thing. And he just disappeared. There's rumors that he set himself on fire. Like, what happened to this guy? And meanwhile, in South Africa, his music became a big thing during the apartheid. He was bigger than Elvis. He sold hundreds of thousands of records. And everyone in South Africa was like, he was an icon. But everyone thought he died or whatever. Turns out the guy was just a builder on a building site for the rest of his life. And it's only thanks to the internet beginning to start that he realizes that he was this superstar in South Africa. And I call it the Rodriguez effect, which is when you have a fucking incredible product, people think this idea, if you just build it, they will come. If you have an incredible product. But no, that's the importance sometimes of marketing. If you don't actually market someone who's as talented as him, you end up with somebody like Rodriguez, where they have the most talent, arguably one of the most talented artists of his generation, who never truly took off. Apart from he had that little win in South Africa, but he never took off elsewhere.
Tell me about Kanye West's market research.
Oh, it's my favorite one. So this is what I call the Olsen thermometer. So there's this, going back to finding niche content on the internet, there's this Diplo animation where Diplo's chatting about, he gets called up by Kanye to work on, I'd argue, probably one of his best albums, which is Watch the Throne, him and Jay-Z. And he goes in the studio, he's producing beats, and he looks over, and you were saying earlier, your artist friend does like e-cigs everywhere and there's things on the floor. In Kanye's studio, there's just the Olsen twins. And Diplo's like, why are Mary Kate and Ashley here? Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. And Kanye says, oh, they're my thermometer for what white girls like in music. So I just play tunes and see what they like. And I go, obviously that's the most Kanye thing ever, but it's also genius, which is when you're creating something for yourself, it's really easy. But when you're creating something for different demographics, having an Olsen thermometer in the room is very, very useful.
The friendship recession, another one that's
ignored by the media, was studied by historians.
Yeah. I think that, the number of men who reported having zero close friends in 1990 was 3%. In 2020 was 15%. People are starting to talk about it with young girls. There's this recent study that came out. I think it's like 60% of teenage girls in America say that they have persistent or constant feelings of hopelessness. Like, it's just the most brutal. I would love to see the study and actually break down what's going on. Global millionaire migration. What's that? Yeah,
the US went from, I think, 10,000 millionaires net migration to like 1,500, which is like an 85% drop, really quick. And the UK is now at a net loss, whereas elsewhere, Australia, the UAE, I think Canada has gone up. So that's definitely a thing that just doesn't really get talked about. Like, why is this happening? Again, another one is Japan's homeless rate. Why does Japan have so few homeless people relative to the rest of the world? They might be lying with their statistics, who knows? But it's so low. It's insanely low. A lot of the reasons that when you actually watch documentaries about it is these gaming cafes. So that's one question to explore.
So they live in gaming cafes?
Live in gaming cafes.
Where do they sleep?
So the people who would be homeless, like, it's kind of like a bed and a chair and they play games, which is obviously a terrible outcome. But is it better than somebody sleeping on the streets? Good question to pose. Another one that I think will become bigger with the next election cycle, which you already take advantage of this, is something I call the great social media merge. So I got this idea from Mr. Beast, which is every platform, for the first time ever, is kind of, you have that unbundling then bundling effect. Everything's just merging on this kind of TikTokization of Reels, Shorts, even Reddit, even Twitter's now going on video. And you're going to see this, which
Spotify,
means Spotify,
Amazon.
So back in the day, you needed to create something for LinkedIn, then something for this, and it meant actually going viral was so much harder. Whereas now, it's actually never been easier to go viral because the same clip, because every platform's bundling together, can go en masse viral. And I don't think they priced in how quicker people are going to get famous.
Yeah, that's looking at content strategy. There's certainly different audiences that it resonates with. So just because something that's 9:16 vertical, we put stuff that reliably does well on Instagram that falls flat on its arse on TikTok. Animation videos reliably do well on Instagram. Can't even get off the ground on YouTube. No one cares. So there is, although the format of the platform may be the same, the physics that drive it are different.
But I wouldn't be surprised if over time those begin to merge more and more together. Another thing on this specific topic is I have one point in the essay of don't ignore India. I think India is possibly the most fascinating country right now, which particularly as a British and American media doesn't really get focused on that much. So Indians are now the number one population in the world, overtaking China this year or last year. They export more in software engineering than Saudi Arabia does in oil. So there's so much going on there. They're the number one users of every single social media platform. So number one users of WhatsApp, number one users of Facebook, number one users of Instagram, number one users of YouTube, which means that if you're going to be creating things online, they're going to be there. Like India, and also India, bear in mind, obviously previously had the British Empire where India was a colony of Britain, has now flipped. So India's economy last year overtook the UK. And again, that's barely discussed, but 20 years from now, we're going to go, that was a big event.
An interesting insight that I learned from a couple of tech YouTube friends with massive channels. When they do expensive, like Apple devices, their RPM and their CPM per thousand on AdSense on the back end of YouTube is very high. But if they do cheap Android devices, tons and tons of Indians watch it, and that drives through the floor.
Android's huge there, yeah.
Yeah. Also, Ali Abdaal talks about Ali's from some subcontinental heritage, and when he does book summaries, his book summaries are often listened to or watched by people from India, but it drives his CPM through the floor. So he's like, he needs to balance revenue with.
But again, I think you're going to see. I know we spoke about this a long time ago, where remote work was the best thing ever to happen to skilled people in the developing world
and short people.
I'll pin that one, and skillless people in the developed world, because all the money is going to flow out. And again, that will be something that will be spoke about 5 years from now, as all this money flows out to what Balaji calls the ascending world and the descending world, as a better model versus the developed and developing world.
It's the ultimate meritocracy.
It's the ultimate meritocracy, but what will happen is people will not like that, because you'll see all this money flow, and then all of a sudden the CPMs in India will get higher and higher.
Also,
and higher.
It's going to drive populist uprisings more and more. You know, if we need stronger borders, okay, please try and police your virtual borders for a workforce. Like, you've got this cohort of 7 million prime working age men between the ages of 22 and 50 who are not working. They're not in education, employment, or training, NEETs. They spend a few thousand hours on average per year playing video games. 50% of that time is either on prescription drugs or smoking weed. From this 7 million man cohort, 7 million out of 330 million isn't much. But when you look at capable men within that age bracket, it's actually a massive proportion. Huge number. If those people aren't going to work, there is a vacuum that will be filled by other workers from elsewhere.
Another one on this is literally this point of what's neglected or what's ignored by the media, will be studied by historians, is the BRICS. So if you combine the BRICS, so like Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and I think
Korea,
UAE as well.
What's the K?
No, it's a C. It's a C for China. Okay. And yeah, that's true actually. But they're literally about to overtake the G7 in terms of economic size. It's like the G7's going down relative to global GDP, and that's going like that. And again, these will be things that they will not talk about in the news. Going back to the Roman Empire point earlier, nobody says Roman Empire has fallen. It's the historians that say that. So the historian frame is so much more useful. But again, you can see, going back to what I said earlier, there's the way I think, or it's probably sometimes you end up visualizing weird things in bed, as we discussed earlier, but there's a lot of root structures and themes there of these gaps of taking the historian's perspective, both at the societal level and also at the individual level.
Yes, the future you, right? Looking back.
It's exactly the same.
I think my two certainly at the moment will be that population collapse.
That's a big one. I wrote about that one. That's a huge one.
Absolutely massive. I keep harping on about it. It's an interesting, it's not even necessarily ignored by the media. It's disincentivized to be spoken about by the media because it runs counter to a climate change narrative that this is what we should be focused on. AI risk. I think, is still now largely in the public seen as like but I can get it to tell me the recipe, or I can get it to tell me 5 interesting stories about Winston Churchill. And yeah, you can, but I mean, if the people that are concerned, if like Eliezer Yudkowsky is right, then there's going to be no historians in the future to be able to worry about what happened in the past in any case, so it doesn't really matter. It's going to be all paper clips. YouTube is the new TV.
Yeah, this is a crazy stat. And one of my new favorite things, when I see a viral YouTuber, I go in the comment section, and the amount of times I'll say, hey, X, I'm a 15-year-old and I love your business content. It's just flooded. And if you actually see, you can find the image I posted on Twitter where YouTube now, it's something like 25% of kids say they spend almost all their time, or such a significant proportion of their time, on YouTube. And you're then seeing this war that play out to the attention economy, where you have like centralized major studios, so Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney, all these, which is kind of top down. We pay billions for ideas by the best directors in the world and we create that, versus bottom up, which is like YouTube. Anyone can go viral. It's completely decentralized, and I wouldn't be surprised if YouTube ultimately, I think they'll both win, but I think YouTube will eat more and more of the attention market.
I'm pretty sure that the amount of time spent on TikTok last year versus Netflix watch time. Let's see. I did not mean that. Watch time. Insider Intelligence predicts that users over the age of 18 will spend an average of 58 minutes per day on TikTok this year, compared with 48.7 minutes for YouTube. Oh, Netflix still within the leader at 62 minutes. So it's like 58 minutes a day on TikTok, 48 minutes a day on YouTube, 62 minutes a day on Netflix. That's for people over the age of 18, right? So under the age of 18 is probably going to be pivoted a lot. That's 3 hours of your day. Here's an interesting one, right? The number of hours that people have in the day hasn't changed, but the amount of time that people spend on online platforms has. That time has to be squeezed from somewhere.
Yeah.
You don't just get to create this time from nothing. So when people talk about, what have been the massive changes, why the discourse is this way, and the mental health and all of the rest of this stuff, look at it as a hardware problem as opposed to a software problem. Is it the globalist conspiracy? Is it the estrogens in the water and the stuff? It might contribute to it a little bit. Maybe it's the fact that 25 years ago, the total amount of screen time that people spent was probably on average like 2 hours, 1 hour a day. And now it's, including work, it's probably closer to 10.
So let's go back to the beginning of the conversation, Optimism agency, right? So if you look at when the smartphone first launched, it was magic pocket computer. Wow, how incredible this is, that I get this fucking thing that sits in my pocket and I can reach anybody, do anything. I can watch Richard Feynman lectures whenever I want. I can go on Stanford University. I can chat to somebody in India just sat here right now. Like, that is fucking incredible. 10 years later, brain-killing device. What's gone wrong? We've gone all the way from the optimism high agency all the way down to pessimism low agency. And the number one, which I never thought would be my most popular essay in terms of when I meet people that they want to talk about, going back to the third door, like what is the thing that no one's discussing, is I call it the smartphone paradox. So right now there's two things people are presented with smartphones. Either one, be a phone addict who's addicted to it 12 hours a day, every single day, refreshing it. And yeah, you get the upsides of constant optionality and things like that, but you're stuck to your phone all day. Or you've got the phoneless Luddite who leaves his phone at home, or leaves her phone at home, which is great, but you can't get an Uber anywhere. If you've got an idea, you can't use your notes. If your mum's ill, you don't find out until 4 weeks later. I have the two Virgin memes, like the phoneless Luddite and then the phone addict, which is the two options that have been presented by society right now. And then I was like, okay, well, where's the wheeled suitcase right now? And I came up with the cocaine phone and the kale phone. So this is my cocaine phone here. This is my kale phone here. And rather than have a phone you're addicted to, or no phone that you're addicted to, what about this? So on the kale phone, essentially, is all the positive, optimistic apps, notes, Google Maps, utilitarian, Uber, Audible, Kindle. And it's sometimes so boring, I just can't even be asked checking it. And if anybody wants to get in touch, I've got like a few emergency contacts that have this number. So I still have, if anything kicks off, I've still got that. And then on my cocaine phone, it's wild. TikTok, Instagram, everything on there. And what's really interesting about this is when I spend all my time on my kale phone, so I usually won't check my cocaine phone till like 1 or 2 p.m. in the afternoon. It completely resets my baseline. So then when I use the cocaine one, I'm bored of it after about an hour. It's too much after about an hour, and I want to go back. And that single piece alone, I get people writing to me weekly saying this thing's like completely changed it. So I call that the smartphone paradox. And it goes back to, well, you can kind of go, oh, well, Apple, when are they going to fix this? Or TikTok's evil. It's like, or you can take it into your own hands and design some wheels on the suitcase.
The bottom line is that you need to take control of your own technology. I would go 100%. As far as to say that like my relationship with technology has probably been the most consistent challenge that I've had to fight with over the last decade, right? It's something every single year when I look at my annual review that no matter how disciplined I've been, I always want to be more disciplined, and I always see it as a challenge. I always think I coulda, woulda, shoulda done better with that. But I'm cocaine, kale, and then a third one as well, right? Yeah. Like I've got 3. And
phone.
Yeah, ketamine phone. I've been rolling with that for a long time, and that's been a big. Do not have social media on the main phone. Like
it's the most, and the beauty of that is you get the upsides of having the phone, all the craziness of social media, finding like random stories, what we were chatting about earlier, but all the upsides of having peace of mind and being able to detach and mindfulness. I think
Audible and podcasts.
Yeah, podcast notes, like everything you can think of, being able to get an Uber somewhere, like all the basics. And again, society presents these 2 extremes at either end of a spectrum, but there's always a third door that exists.
The scale of pharma marketing.
Yeah, that's a big one. Again, going back to, as someone who fucking loves advertising, loves collecting the best ads of all time, only US and New Zealand are allowed to run pharmaceutical advertising. I can't quote the exact ones, but I think it's MSNBC, 2 other big news networks in the US. Their biggest advertisers are pharmaceutical companies. But it goes back to my point earlier, which is, okay, that's true. That's the thing that exists. Should that exist? That's open for debate. That's an open question. But where are the iconic exercise campaigns? If we know that it can have a fucking 500% increase, taking somebody from the bottom 25% of exercise to the top 2%, where are those campaigns, and why aren't the government investing in them? I put out a thing of, if any government wants to invest, DM me and I'll help.
Well,
I've got any DMs yet. So
speaking about government investment, you've got the Great Tech Neglect.
Yeah. So this is one of my favorite ones, which is talk about ignored by the media, studied by historians. The UK government posted a job role for the head of cybersecurity for the UK government, and the proposed salary was £55,000, which again, for a lot of people is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but for the head of cybersecurity, how is that? How is that possible?
Well, when you think about your job is in cybersecurity, and the number one flaw that all cyber systems have is the human element. Every single hacker fundamentally is a human hacker first, not a computer hacker. Almost everybody, I think it's called soft hacking or something like that, where they try and look for the human element in. If this guy or girl is getting £57,000 per year, like how many Bitcoin do you think that a rogue nation has to be able to bribe that person? There's your vector of attack.
Yeah. And the 2 things I've been really focused on the last kind of 24 months is traveling and studying different cultures, because you can go, oh, why does Japan have so few homeless people? Or how come the UK is doing this? But meanwhile, in Singapore, they pay the average politician something like $750,000, and they have KPIs based off how well the country's performing. So study different cultures, travel a lot, and you begin to see those gaps, as well as when you study history, you begin to take a historian's frame to the present moment.
How incredible modern aviation is.
This is the wildest one. And every time I get on an airplane, even when I flew here, I always say to myself, I go, and this isn't even a gratitude hack, I go, I'm going to die today. I go, as we're taking off, especially because I rant about how modern aviation is, I go, it'd be the most ironic death.
For the modern aviation guy.
Elon Musk says that of the most entertaining outcome will happen, of the guy that rants about how amazing aviation is will die on a flight. So here's 2 stats. I think it's 2021. The number of deaths on an airline in 2021 was around about 120 to 180, depending on the statistics you look at. The number of car deaths was around about 1.1 million. So, and think about how much more dangerous an airplane taking off is. And that is completely neglected. I think probably because it's a positive story and we don't want to focus on it, or we just take it for granted, the same way we take the sewage system for granted, the same way we take electricity system for granted. All these great ideas we take for granted, and then we focus on all the nonsense with the opportunity costs that we have. is humongous, that we don't think about how wonderful modern aviation is.
Well, we have this threat detection system, right? And we also have a smoke detector principle, which is it is far better for us to assume that something bad is going to go wrong and it not happen than us assume that something is going to go well and that not occur. Like, there is a bush that shakes over the far side. I can either be scared because it might be aligned and run away, and it might be aligned or it might not, but the cost of me running away is relatively low. The cost of me being eaten is very high. So we always have this negativity bias. It's inbuilt into us. It is your job to swim upstream against that. And stats like that, I think, are very, very important to remind you. What's the chance of you dying in the car en route to the airport compared
That's it.
with this?
They say the most dangerous thing about a flight is the drive to the airport.
Well, I mean, I remember it's in Matthew Walker's book where he talks about how the number of doctors that have done, I think it's surgeons, the number of doctors or surgeons that have worked 12-hour shifts in a hospital that upon their drive home crash and then get taken back to their own hospital to be worked on because of how sleep deprived they are.
Wow. I think there's a book called Black Box Thinking, which I recommend, which studies the aviation industry, where they compare, well, why are airline deaths going down so much? Meanwhile, hospital deaths are going up so much. And he has a few interesting hypotheses about cultural things. And with a black box, they literally observe once a plane crashes, what happens. It records it. And because often the people are dead, there's no ego involved, so they can objectively assess it. But the lessons from the aviation industry should be applied everywhere. And this ties into the next point, which is, what happened to ticker tape parades? At ticker tape parades, Peter Thiel has this great point where they used to be huge. People would go out in the street and applaud JFK, applaud these great individuals. And it started off in the 1910s, became super popular all the way up to the 1970s, and then just slowly fade away. The last iconic individual really was Nelson Mandela in 1990 in New York. After that, there's a few sports teams, not individuals, collectives, a few nurses, and a few things like that. But what happened to that, my thesis is like, where's the ticker tape parade for the Wright brothers, or where's the day off for the Wright brothers? Because fucking hell, you think about talk about high agency individuals.
Well, no one can agree on any cultural heroes anymore. There is nobody.
Do you think the Wright brothers are up for debate?
But new ones. Like, you're not going to throw a ticker tape parade for the Wright brothers now, are you?
Yeah, true.
Try and think of, who do you think is the most unobjectionable person? Maybe The Rock. He probably doesn't do badly.
And even then he probably scores like 51 to 49 in the polls. You know
absolutely. I mean, he did put his foot in it to do with, I think maybe it was a race thing and maybe it was a trans thing a few years ago. So yeah, when the Overton window has become so highly constrained, and when concept creep has occurred to the point where everybody will find something that they can justifiably be insulted by, there are landmines everywhere for somebody to step on.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's a
question I have for you that I was thinking about on the way down. We're talking about history a lot here, and studying history has given me such a fantastic frame about these things. Why is it? So music is a specific thing where people consume a lot of music from the past, even to this day. Like, on the way down, I love Christopher Cross, Ride Like the Wind, one of my favorite songs from multiple decades ago. You think of AC/DC, Michael Jackson, like all these amazing artists that's still relevant today, and people still consume the music today. Versus with social media, David Perel has that concept of the never ending now. People only consume content the last 24 hours. Probably most people listening to this still apply this. But imagine if you applied that to music, where all you could listen to was the Island Boys, or like the music that's been made literally today. It'd be terrible. But why do we do that for information consumption? I've not quite figured that out yet.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think what we go to for music and what we go to for the other types of content that we consume are very different things. We go to music for a vibe, to put ourselves into a particular kind of emotional state a lot of the time. Music seems to be a lot more Lindy because there are universal laws. No one's going back. I always say this about Shapiro's channel. Ben's got this rapidly growing channel and he's been very, very successful on YouTube and in podcasting and all the rest of it. No one's going back and listening to Ben Shapiro's mid-2020 podcast episodes because they're inherently about they're about the last 24 hours.
But there's so much in history that is relevant, or so much amazing content out there that is relevant. So on Perel, he has this other concept of the paradox of abundance, where right now you've never seen more people in the obesity levels are off the charts. Another thing are probably ignored by the media or studied by historians, off the charts. But also the number of Greek people that like Greek gods is also off the charts. You have this weird, at either end of the barbell, like either extremes. And I think the exact's true of information consumption. I posted this thing the other day of like the paradox of abundance of YouTube. You can, going back to the smartphone paradox as well, you can use YouTube to search Richard Feynman lecture, Charlie Munger, the history of World War II, how did Winston Churchill prepare his speeches, or you can search World Star Hip Hop fights or the Island Boys. And that paradox of abundance exists.
There's this really cool quote, another Gwynda one here, that says, the combination of the digital age constantly exposing us to new outrages and cultural elites constantly creating new outrages out of nothing has skyrocketed the number of outrages we now face. In a world prickling with provocations, we cannot let our sensitivities roam free. If we allow ourselves to be goaded by every invisible and visible indignation, we will endlessly be distracted from our goals and easily controlled by emotional manipulators like trolls, disinformation agents, and demagogues. I block the easily outraged because they're the foot soldiers of the mob who, in the old days, would have lynched people over neighborhood rumors. Those without self-control are seen controlled by others. Those without self-control are soon controlled by others. They're the useful idiots of ideologues, the tools of tyranny. So with that, I think you just show that everybody has a thing that they can find which is reprehensible, that the person that they're looking at has done, which is why the ticker tape parade thing has stopped. Who can everybody agree on as being a hero? And if you don't have any cultural icons that you can hold up, it's very difficult to rally around. Like, if you tried to hold a ticker tape parade for pretty much anybody, there would be an equally sized anti-parade for the same thing, which is fucking insane. And also, I guess, goes back to the pessimism bias. Most people die at 25 and aren't buried until they're 75. Why?
This references what we were chatting about earlier, where at 25, 0 to 25, before that is a beautiful design video game. It's like grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, grade 4, grade 5, or year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5 if you're English. And you kind of progress up like a beautiful milestone every single year through high school, through college, and you all of a sudden at 25, those milestones just become marriage, which is obviously might be on the decline, mortgage, funerals of loved ones, kids, and then your own funeral. So like the amount of you go from like a milestone so regularly to almost non-existent. And big thing I have of reasons why I think it happens is, one, lack of milestones. Institutionalization, because people go from the education system where they kind of sat there all day for 18 years asking to go to the toilet, and then they just go and fucking thrown out in the wild like a prisoner. And as a result, people really struggle to adapt to that. I also think people just don't really care about adults. I think it's quite sad.
They haven't got any support groups.
They haven't got any support groups. So the time spent with family, time spent with friends, even co-workers ultimately goes down towards the end. So you factor in all those things.
Plus that parenting switch thing.
So there's the parenting switch as well, which is you go from having your caregivers there your entire life, supporting you. And again, going back to milestones, all of a sudden, then one day you get a phone call and you're their caregiver, or they're not even here. So it just immediately switches on you, and all those things begin to stack up, which is super depressing, super like pessimistic, maybe we end on that note, like super nihilistic end. But no, actually the optimistic answer I wrote about, which is a few solutions for that, which is, one, create regular milestones. So I'll try and split the year into quarters now, which is enough time to sprint at things, but also then have a week off, completely reflect, and then rebuild the plan. So then you have like 4 milestones per year. 2, try and schedule things in with friends regularly, family regularly. You use your Google Calendar for like weekly meetings with people at work. You can use it for friends. You can use it for family as well. 3, I think we also have a lack of religion in current society, and we've kind of thrown the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of atheists look down on it, but those regular rituals, a thing bigger than you that you're working on, so important to have. So try and take Sabbaths, fasting, things like that. You can take quite a lot from religion, and all of a sudden you can then begin to not die at 25, which I think is a huge, huge problem. It's a silent problem as well.
George Mack, ladies and gentlemen, dudes, I love you. I'm really, really glad that you came to see me in Austin. What should people do if they want to check out more of your writing? You're one of the quickest growing guys on Twitter at the moment. Where should they go?
Yeah, a few things. So I put together all the best ideas and resources I found at george-mack.com. So you can just get that there completely for free, and I kind of update it with time, and then I'll send a weekly newsletter related to that. You can also just literally go to George-Mack at Twitter, and then there's also a load of great ads, which is kind of under, right now the current URL's marketingplug.com, but that will change, but you'll still be relevant when people hear this. Before we go though, one thing I'd like to say, just to break the fourth wall for the audience. Me and you was sat on a beach a few years ago now, and you remember what you said to me? You said, if I can get to 100,000 subscribers, and hopefully now we'll be at the 1 million mark. And the big thing I've learned as a Brit touring America is there's a lot we can take from Americans and vice versa. They are super complimentary to their friends, which we are often quite like mocking of each other, quite insulted to each other. But I'm proud of you, man. You've absolutely smashed it. And I think for a lot of listeners out there, you set an example of an infinite game that you keep sticking at, and boom, X% of the audience has come in the last 12 months. What a compounding game, man. And thank you for having me.
My pleasure, man. We're going to keep on doing it together.
Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that episode, then press here for a selection of the best clips from the podcast over the last few weeks. And don't forget to subscribe.